Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Jessie, and this week I'm going over how I rate my books. I use Goodreads to rate books. I think as far as I know, that's probably the most commonly used app for tracking grading. I think there's other apps in the works, like I think I've heard of StoryGraph, but Goodreads is the one that I've been using for a couple of years now, and until there's something else that definitely works better, I guess it's probably what I'll continue using. I guess, want to remind you that, ratings are subjective. So they're based on opinions, and everyone kind of, comes up with their own based off their own experiences and thoughts and stuff. So, sorry if this isn't like rocket science and as exact as you might want. And then I also want to let you know that I know this probably isn't the most demanded video ever, but I'm always curious about like what makes people rate books the way they do. And so because I'm curious about other people's rating styles, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my own. So as I said earlier, I use Goodreads to rate books, and Goodreads ratings go from no rating to 1 to 5 stars, with the star ratings being in whole numbers. You can't pick, like 1.5, 2.25, stuff like that. So that kind of sucks. I wish there was like a little bit more variance in rating. It'd be hard to describe this video, but it'd be easier to rate the books that like aren't quite a 4-star or a 5-star, so you have to pick. It'd be easier to not have to just pick like that. Anyways, let's get started with how I rate books that I've read. I specifically use no rating for books that I've read that are memoirs or autobiographies or just anything that seems very personal. For example, Wasted by Maria Hornbacher describes her experiences with bulimia and anorexia from childhood to her adulthood, and I feel like that's a very personal experience, so I don't want to rate her experience with her eating disorder. Similarly to Hunger by Roxane Gay, she describes, a traumatic event that happened to her in her childhood that also affected her relationship with her body and food as an adult, and I feel like that's too personal to rate as well. And then lastly, The Beauty in Breaking by Michelle Harper was another memoir I read, but this one was about a Black emergency room doctor and her experiences as a Black emergency room doctor, and I just felt like hers was also too personal for me to rate as well. So like when I say no rating, it's not necessarily a bad rating. It's really not a rating at all. It's just, it was too personal. I don't want to rate someone's true life experiences. Next we have 1 star. And as long as I've used Goodreads, there's only one book that I've given 1 star. And so 1 star is reserved for books where there is nothing I like about it at all. There's no redeeming quality that I can find for me personally. I don't like any of the characters. They're either unbelievable or I don't necessarily mind dislikable characters or unlikable characters. I don't necessarily mind unlikable characters unless there's like not even the faintest glimmer of hope for me personally. And then I also, if I don't like the plot once I start reading, and I go into most books with the expectation that I'm going to like it, because I'm not going to read something I'm not interested in reading, that I don't want to read and I'm not excited for. So for me, the one and only book I have for this example is Again But Better by Christine Riccio. I didn't like anything about this book. I didn't like Shane as the main character. I just found the idea that she was supposed to be very awkward and uncomfortable around people and having trouble making friends. Like, she came out of it making friends immediately. So I found it unbelievable. I found her character unbelievable. I didn't like her that much. I found her love interest completely unlikable. No redeeming qualities. And then the actual plot sounded so interesting, on the inside flap of the book. And then once I actually started reading, I didn't like the time travel element, which I can't even remember if that was mentioned in the, what's it called? Flap. It may have been, but I didn't like that part of it. I didn't like, the way it repeated everything exactly as is, except, Shane just did a better job at her internship. Potential spoiler, sorry. But that book, I had so much trouble liking anything about it that it became a 1-star rating for me. And also, just because I've rated like a book 1 star doesn't mean I won't read anything else by the author. For example, I'm interested in reading Better Together by Christine Riccio, and it comes out next year. So next we have 2 stars. And 2 stars are books where I didn't really like anything that much either, but there must have been something that I didn't mind as much, or something that made it better and more likable. And so an example of that would be Suicide Notes from Beautiful Girls by Lynn Weingarten. I went to this book totally excited to read it. It sounded like such an interesting plot that, you know, the best friend is dead and she has to find out what happened to her. And I really liked the twist at first, but as I read it, just something about it didn't click. I liked the plot, but the way it was handled, I didn't like as much. And it made it harder for me to read and hard for me to pay attention to where I didn't want to read it. I wanted to know what happened, but I didn't actually want to read it. And so that book became like a 2 stars because there were parts of it I liked, but there's a lot more I didn't like than what I actually liked. So next we have 3 stars, and 3-star books are books that like I enjoyed for the most part, but I didn't love, and they'll never be a favorite. And so like I may have disliked something about the plot but enjoyed the characters. I may have disliked the characters but enjoyed something about the plot. Or there's just something I can't put my fingers on where I liked bits of stuff, but just something was off that wasn't doing it for me. An example of this would be One by One by Ruth Ware. I recently read that book. It was one that I was really excited to read. I think I've heard a lot of people talking about it. I've been on my wait list for it through Libby for a while, and then I was finally able to read it. And I didn't hate it or anything. I liked it, but I didn't love it. It was interesting. The characters were very interesting. I liked most of the characters and their backstories, and I thought they were all fairly complex. But however, I didn't like the plot as much or how it was carried out. I don't know what it was about it, but yeah. And I don't think that I would have liked it better if there had been more points of views either. But there was just something about it that like I liked the characters. The idea of the plot was interesting, but the way it was actually carried out I didn't like as much. But I liked the characters enough and they carried the story enough for it to be a 3-star rating for me. So next we have a 4-star rating. And 4-star ratings are books that I really loved actually. Like I love them, but there's always just something about them that wasn't it for me. So like it could have been a character, it could have been a piece of a plot that just didn't do it for me, but I loved everything else. And that one thing just kind of knocked it off a star. So for example, A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Amaro. I love that book. It was so well written. It was so interesting. I think it handled very hard topics really well. And I think it handled them at like a teenage level too, that I thought was really good and could be useful. So for example, Tavia, she's a siren, and sirens are only Black women in this universe. So following her experience as a siren, having to face, you know, racism for already being Black, sexism for being a woman, and as well as just prejudice for also being a siren if she's ever discovered. Her plot was very interesting and engaging throughout the whole story, watching her come into her voice and becoming comfortable with all parts of her identity instead of only being comfortable, or at least seemingly comfortable, with being a Black woman. She eventually becomes comfortable being a siren and a Black woman. Whereas Effie's was really interesting as well, trying to piece together what was going on with her, because throughout the story you get these hints that, you know, there's more than what there seems to be. Like Effie, she has insanely dry skin. Her skin starts peeling at some point. She has blackouts. There's stuff happening to people around her. And trying to figure out what's happening to her is really interesting and it's engaging. But then once you figure out what happened, it's still interesting until I found out, you know, who caused everything to happen. And then like why she was sent to live with Tavia. And it just, that part kind of felt a little flat for me. Everything else about the book was great and amazing. I loved it. But that one part just didn't do it for me and knocked it down a rating. So lastly, we have 5-star ratings. And these are books where I loved just about everything about. There's almost nothing at all that I can think of that I would change or could be changed. Where I love the characters, the plot, the way the story was written, just everything does it for me. And so an example of this would be first, Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. I think that's still one of my favorite books for the year. It was just so interesting, the idea of Claudia trying to figure out what's happening to her friend Monday. In the whole book, you're trying to figure out why do none of the adults seem to care what's going on. And then the twist at the end was really good. So like the plot was really engaging throughout, but also the characters, like Claudia's character was very interesting. And then like also like her relationship with Monday was really nice, and then her relationship with her family. All the characters were really interesting. I liked the way their relationships were set up, as well as the plot was amazing. I just loved the overall story. Anyways, those are all the ratings that are offered on Goodreads and how I use them whenever I rate books. It's not rocket science. There's no exact formula. These are just the basic guidelines, as well as a little bit of like gut feeling about the book as I'm reading it. That helped me pick what my rating is. And like I'd say 3 through 5 stars are good, and 2 and 1 stars are the ones that are bad for me. 3 stars are pretty much like pretty stuck in the middle, but for the most part I like most of the 3 stars I read. There was just things about them that I wasn't as big of a fan of. But like I said earlier, it's not an exact formula. There's times where like a star that should have gotten a 2-star rating might get a 3-star because like gut feeling, that's what it is, even with all this stuff going on. Anyways, do you guys follow any basic guidelines whenever you're rating books, or you just go with your gut? Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will actually talk to you guys Thursday whenever I post my November bullet journal setup. Bye.